It was another grey day at Lockidge maximum security, where even the weather seemed to be doing time. The walls wore the colour of dried-out fear, and the routine was predictable, brutal, and silent, except when the predators decided to hunt. In the mess hall, the clatter of metal cutlery on trays mixed with muffled conversations. Everyone ate with sidelong glances, always watching. Chaos could start at any second, over anything. A look, a mistake, a wrong move. The new inmate walked in, bold, muscular, carrying himself like a man who'd seen more death than most inside those walls. He wore the standard blue jumpsuit, but his body felt bigger than the cell. His eyes weren't searching for anyone. He just sat down, picked up his chopsticks, and started eating. Calmly, like he was at peace in the middle of a battlefield. But peace didn't belong in a place like that. Two guys closed in. Shirtless, inked with gang tattoos, bodies chiseled like stone, faces that had broken more bones than they could count. They weren't nobodies. They were the prison's elite of terror, led by Rico, an ex-street fighter who ran Block D with a single glare. One of them planted himself to the left, arms crossed, watching the newcomer with pure contempt. The other came up on the right, carrying a metal bucket of water. The plan was simple. Humiliate, intimidate, make it clear who called the shots. Rule was clear: rookies either bow down or bleed. The man kept eating. He didn't flinch, eyes fixed on his plate as if the world around him didn't exist. Complete silence. A tattooed arm rose. A cold splash of water hit his head, running down his bald scalp, soaking his uniform, his tray, his food. Nobody laughed. The inmates around them held their breath. The newcomer stopped eating for a second. He dropped the chopsticks, closed his eyes, took a breath. He didn't say a word. He didn't move. Then, as if nothing had happened, he picked the chopsticks back up and kept eating. Wet, quiet. Like the humiliation hadn't landed, like it didn't matter, like he had faced worse than two bullies in a prison dining hall. That gesture, it broke something. The two thugs froze. That wasn't the reaction of a normal man. It wasn't pride. It wasn't stubbornness. It was something else. Like the guy knew something they didn't. Like he was just waiting. In the corner, Rico watched. He crossed his arms and smiled. He knew what was coming next. He couldn't wait. The tension in the mess hall tasted metallic now, because everyone there understood one thing in that moment. The new inmate wasn't afraid. He was testing how far hell could push before it burned back. And when it burned, no one would walk away unscathed. The first real attempt came 3 days later. It was shower time. The guards, dulled by routine and worn down by exhaustion, left the inmates alone for too long. Lockidge's showers, with their mold-stained walls and slippery floors, were the perfect place for accidents. Jay walked in like always, silent. He stripped down, hung his uniform on the wall, and headed to the corner stall, where the hot water dripped weaker. The other men's tattoos seemed to shift in the thick steam, like snakes in the dark. Eyes met. Nobody dared get close. But that morning, someone would. Rico arrived. Behind him, Mendez and Buster. They entered quietly, but the slap of their sandals on the wet tile was enough to alert anyone except Jay. He didn't turn. He stayed under the water, unmoving, as if he hadn't noticed a thing. Mendez cracked his neck, joints popping. Buster flexed and unflexed his fists, restless. Rico was the first to speak. "Nice spot to die, soldier." Jay said nothing. Rico crept closer, his footsteps muffled by the buzz of the old plumbing. Less than a foot away, he lifted his hand and slapped Jay on the shoulder. "Look at me when I talk to you, damn it." Jay turned his head, just enough to catch Rico from the corner of his eye. And in that glance, there was something inhuman, an absence of fear that made Buster instinctively step back. "This guy ain't normal," Buster muttered. But no one listened. Mendez struck first, a straight punch. Fast, precise. But before his fist landed, something happened. Jay moved. Not like someone reacting, not like someone defending, but like a man who already knew what was coming. He caught Mendez's arm, twisted it back with a sharp crack. In one fluid motion, he spun and slammed him into the wall with a dull thud. Rico lunged, but Jay slid across the wet floor like he'd rehearsed it for years. A kick to the knee, a strike to the jaw. Rico collapsed, dazed and bloody. Buster froze, hesitated, and that cost him. Jay stepped in, snatched the bar of soap Buster had dropped and slid it under his foot to knock him off balance. Buster hit the ground hard. Before he could recover, Jay was already on him, a hand pressed to his throat, not choking, just reminding him that he could. Silence. Water dripped over the bodies sprawled on the floor. Jay stood, grabbed his towel, dried off calmly, and slipped back into his drenched uniform. He glanced back once. Rico was still trying to get up, spitting blood. Jay didn't speak, but his eyes said it all. That was your last warning. In the mess hall, the story spread in minutes. Witnesses relayed every detail, listeners exaggerated. Within hours, his name wasn't just a name anymore. It was a whisper in the halls, a myth in the cells. "He dropped 3 guys without blinking," swore one inmate from Block A. "He's a trained killer, man. His eyes—" "They ain't right," said another. And the guards pretended not to notice. In Lockidge, keeping the peace often meant letting the monsters fight until only one was left standing. And right now, there was only one monster on his feet. But Jay didn't celebrate. He wasn't looking for recognition. If anything, it seemed to tighten something inside him, as if every fight dragged him closer to something he was trying to bury. A past he couldn't shake, a memory that clawed its way back every time he resisted. That night, he had his first visible nightmare. Padre, the inmate in the next cell, woke to muffled screams. Jay trembled, soaked in sweat, eyes wide open like he was watching flames. "Fire! Fire! They're all—" he muttered, trapped between sleep and waking. The next day, he didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't train. Rico, sick and with a shattered jaw, was moved to the infirmary, but swore revenge. Mendez could barely walk. And Buster didn't talk anymore, not after looking into that man's eyes and seeing the abyss. But what no one knew was that Jay wasn't there by accident. He had walked into Lockidge by choice, and he hadn't even started what he came to do. In Lockridge's administrative wing, Director Warren scanned reports with a frown. The mess hall fight, the shower incident, all linked to the same man, inmate Jay, the puzzle the system itself couldn't solve. Warren had seen every kind of criminal, manipulators, psychopaths, broken soldiers. But this man didn't fit. He never lashed out impulsively, never struck without provocation. His medical files showed the vitals of an athlete, perfect reflexes, no trace of drugs or disorders. The problem wasn't physical. It was deeper, deliberate. "He's not here by chance," Warren muttered to his deputy. "He's studying the place like Lockidge is a target, not a prison." And inside, that suspicion was starting to feel true. In the prison library, Jay spent hours quietly flipping through old records and maintenance manuals, but he wasn't reading at random. His eyes stayed on the old foundation maps, the ventilation routes, the abandoned tunnels. Padre noticed before anyone else. "You're not here to pay for some crime, are you?" he asked one day, eyes still on the chessboard in front of him. "You came to find something." Jay didn't answer, but he stopped moving the pieces, and that was enough. Meanwhile, another player entered the board. Agent Keller, FBI undercover, newly placed in Lockidge, disguised as a low-security inmate. Officially, he was there to investigate an arms smuggling ring inside the prison. But it didn't take long to realize the whispers weren't about guns. They were about the ghost inmate, who had dropped 3 men, like it was nothing. Keller cornered Padre for intel. "This guy, Jay, where's he from?" From hell, probably. But he's still coming back, Padre said. Keller smirked but didn't brush it off. He knew there was truth buried in those words. Meanwhile, Rico, beaten, humiliated, got regular visits in the infirmary from a mysterious man. He wasn't staff, not an inmate. Always dressed in black, posture like steel. Never gave his name. "The plan's changed," the man whispered. "We have a new objective now. Stay out of it." "And if I don't?" Rico spat blood. The man just looked at him, expressionless, then walked out. That night, the guard who'd let the visitor in was found unconscious. The next morning, Rico asked to be transferred to the psych ward. Nobody questioned it. Meanwhile, Jay uncovered a scribble in one of the old library books. Sub-level 3, sealed entry 1999, restricted access. He recognized the code, military language. But what was buried beneath Lockidge? The answer came with the name of an inmate who had died in 2003. A civil engineer convicted of conspiracy against the state. Before being silenced, he'd worked on reinforcing the prison's foundations. The man had known too much, and Jay was tracing his steps. That's when Padre revealed his own connection. "He was my brother," Padre said one night while polishing his shoes. "They threw him in isolation. 2 days later, he was dead. No autopsy. No explanations. You're here to find out what he discovered, aren't you?" "Yes," Jay answered. For the first time, his voice was clear. The old man sighed and pulled a scrap of paper from his shoe. A sketch, an unfinished map, the last missing piece. "Here, but be careful, son. Whatever you find down there might be worse than any sentence." Back in his cell, Jay stitched the paper into the seam of his sleeve, and for the first time since arriving, he looked up at the ceiling with the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. Not joy, preparation, because now he knew where he had to go, and who he had to stop. It was a stifling night when the alarms went off, not the sirens from the towers, but the inmate alarms, the invisible ones, the kind that came from watchful eyes, hurried whispers, the shift in air before a storm. In Block D, a prisoner was found dead. No signs of struggle, not a drop of blood. But his eyes were wide open, fixed on the ceiling, as if he'd seen something he never should have. His name was Curtis. He had a clean record inside, worked in the laundry, and he'd been spotted talking to Jay days earlier. It was the first warning. Jay understood instantly. The next morning, Keller, the undercover agent, pulled Padre aside. "They're moving faster than I thought. I saw the body, and I saw the mark on his shoulder." "What mark?" 3 parallel lines, old scar, surgical cut. Padre's eyes widened. Project Lazarus. It was a forbidden word, a buried memory, an experimental program from the 90s officially shut down. Unofficially, buried alive. Jay overheard. The connection was clear. The dead engineer, Padre's brother, had worked on the underground level where Project Lazarus files were sealed away, a military experiment involving neurological conditioning, psychological control, reprogramming soldiers into silent execution units. Human weapons, no soul, no memory. And now, that project was breathing again. Back in his cell, Jay ripped the seam of his sleeve and unfolded the paper map. In the lower corner, faded letters spelled out LX13. He cross-checked it with the library manuals. It was the designation of a sealed chamber. No access through normal routes. There was only one way in, through the maintenance tunnel beneath the psych ward. But it was guarded. Jay began planning, tracking guard rotations, shift swaps, night movements, camera blind spots. Silent, precise. Like a man trained to infiltrate, kill, and vanish without a trace. But then, something happened he hadn't planned for. Padre vanished. His cell was found open, no signs of a fight, no warning, just a charcoal mark on the wall, 3 parallel lines, the signature. Keller tried to reach his FBI link, but his remote access was cut. Officially, his mission didn't even exist anymore. He was alone, abandoned. And deep down, he knew what that meant. The government itself had turned a blind eye to Lockidge. Someone above didn't want the past dug up. For the first time, Jay broke the silence between them. "You won't make it out if you keep waiting for orders." "And you will. I came here because I knew hell was buried in this place. But now, it's awake." That night, Jay executed the first phase. He shorted the medical wing's electrical panel. In the blackout, he slipped through the inner halls to the maintenance hatch, jumped the grate, rolled between steam pipes until he reached the hatch marked LX-13, locked, but not for long. With a scrap of wire hidden in his shoe, he popped it in under a minute. The hatch creaked open. Inside, the air reeked of mold and rust. Iron steps led down a narrow corridor, dimly lit by flickering lights. The walls were covered with old postings, laminated documents, scratched-out dates, black and white photos, soldiers in uniform, blank eyes, and under each photo, a word scribbled by hand: rejected. Jay walked slowly, scanning every inch, and then he saw it. At the end of the corridor, a mirror, but not a normal one, a one-way observation glass. He was being watched. Silhouettes moved on the other side. A dark room. Someone stepped closer to the glass. A tall man in a black suit. Familiar. The man flicked on the light, and Jay froze. It was him. Not an exact copy, but another version. Clean-shaven, tactical uniform, cropped hair, expression flat as stone. "No way," Jay whispered, stepping back. The intercom crackled to life. "Welcome back, Unit J-13. Your mission will be reactivated shortly." Jay stared at the glass, at himself, but not himself. That wasn't who he was. That was what he'd been made to be. When he emerged from the underground, his breathing was ragged. For the first time, his face betrayed more than coldness. There was confusion, rage, maybe fear. That image in the glass wasn't just a reflection, it was real. That other version of him still existed, and it was active. If that was real, then all his memories, every scar, every pain, might have been planted, false, created, worse than torture. Because if he wasn't who he thought he was, then who the hell was he? The walk back to his cell was silent. No one saw, no one heard, like the tunnel had been nothing but a nightmare. But Lockidge had changed. The air had shifted. Every stare felt calculated now. Something invisible had awakened, and it was moving among the inmates, measuring every step, every reaction. Keller noticed first. The guards were different, tenser, quieter, following orders that didn't come from the warden. One admin worker Keller used to feed information disappeared. The tower access was locked down. "They're preparing something," Keller whispered during a rare moment with Jay in the laundry. Jay didn't answer. He spoke even less now. His eyes fixed on places nobody else could see, like he was hearing voices bleeding through the walls. The next night, Padre reappeared, but he wasn't the same. His eyes were blank, his steps shuffled, his voice dragged. A fresh scar ran along the back of his neck, right where brain meets spine. When Jay tried to speak to him, the old man only smiled. "It's time you remembered who you are." Jay grabbed his arm. "What did they do to you?" The old man chuckled, a dry, broken laugh, like he was in on some inside joke. "I saw them down there. They were waiting for you." "Who?" "The others." Then, as if on cue, Padre collapsed. They took him to the infirmary. No one saw him again. Rumors spread like wildfire. "They implanted something in him," one inmate whispered. "He talked like he was being controlled," said another. The next morning, a group of inmates started acting strange. They stopped eating, stopped sleeping, sat in the yard staring at the sky, motionless, as if waiting for a signal. Jay recognized the pattern: conditioning, brainwashing, activation of dormant units. And if they were activating others, it meant he'd failed to be controlled. Back in his cell, Jay began to write. Words, codes, maps, memories came in flashes. A dark cell, a room of light, voices, orders barked in monotone, weapons, training. He wasn't a criminal, he was a project. That night, Keller slipped in, sweaty, pale, hiding an envelope under his shirt. "I got what you need," he whispered, tossing it on the bunk. Jay opened it. Photos, files, images of soldiers with the same tattoo on their arms. 3 parallel lines. Men who had died in service but kept showing up in war zones, ghosts in flesh. Among them, an old photo of Jay not alone. Next to him, smiling, was the other Jay he'd seen through the glass. And behind them, standing in a suit, was the same man who had visited Rico in the infirmary. Keller met Jay's eyes. "They're building soldiers who can be shut down, rewritten, and reactivated remotely. And you were one of them." Was. No, you still are. The difference is, something went wrong with you. Jay closed his eyes, drew a long breath, then whispered, "Nothing went wrong." I woke up. Silence. In the mess hall the next morning, the activated ones started moving together. Same rhythm, same formation. Like chess pieces being set on the board, Lockidge wasn't a prison anymore. It was a military lab running in plain sight, and Jay, the one flaw in the system, was the last variable they couldn't control. Jay's awakening was quiet, but irreversible. Sitting on the edge of his bunk, eyes fixed on the floor, he didn't shake, didn't sweat. He was perfectly calm, because for the first time in years, he knew exactly what had to be done. For a long time, Jay believed silence kept him safe, that hiding his mind was the same as staying in control. Now he understood. Real control would only come when he looked inward without fear, even if what he found there was a monster built by human hands. The reprogramming sessions had failed on him for a reason, and that reason lived inside a single memory the scientist couldn't wipe. A child's face, fear and trust tangled together, looking up at him. His son, or someone he'd sworn to protect. The image was blurred, but the feeling was crystal clear. The pain of losing him, the promise that he would never again be a weapon in anyone's hands. That's why he resisted. That's why he was still human. And now, that reason was enough to fight. Jay started moving, careful, invisible. He returned to the library, but not for maps this time. He was looking for people. Men who still owned their minds, who weren't under the program's thumb. Calmly, he approached 3 key inmates. First, Micah, the former teacher, still sharp, with a background in psychology. He could spot altered behavior. Second, Anderson, a former soldier like Jay, discharged for refusing an execution order, scars like Jay's. Third, Keller, the undercover agent, cut off from the FBI now, committed to finishing his mission or dying trying. "I'm in," Keller said without blinking, "but you have to tell me the truth. Who's the man in the mirror? The other version of me, the one that never woke up." "He here." "Not yet, but he's coming. Once everyone's activated, he's the final command." Micah studied the activated inmates. He found patterns, synchronized movements, delayed responses to normal stimuli, but instant reactions to certain sounds. The cleaning timers beep, the gates click. They were being programmed by sound. That was the weak link, the activation code. Meanwhile, Anderson handled logistics. He tracked guard movement and sketched alternate routes based on the new routines. In a week, they had a plan. Infiltrate the medical wing and reach the server that controlled the prison's internal audio. Jay, for his part, trained harder than ever, silent, in the dead of night. Every push-up, every punch into concrete, a reminder of what he'd have to face. He knew this wasn't prep for an escape. It was prep for a head-on collision with the thing that made him. Keller asked in a low voice during a night watch, "You're going to kill him, aren't you?" Jay nodded. Not because he's the enemy, because he's what I would have been if I hadn't remembered. On the night of the op, the team split. Micah lit a small fire in the library archives, pulling 2 security shifts off post. Anderson faked a seizure in the yard, forcing medics out of the wing. Jay and Keller slid through the maintenance tunnel to the audio control room. The door had a fingerprint lock, but Jay had memorized a tech's access pattern, and with a bent metal spoof, they beat the latch. Inside, a tangle of cables and aging panels. The main server, obsolete but alive. Over the radio, Micah read the activation sound patterns he decoded. Signal 391 triggers march posture, 542 lock speech, and code 777... Silence. What's it do? No idea. It's never been used. Keller looked at Jay. We rolling the dice? Now or never? Jay keyed it in. A piercing tone washed through the prison. For 3 full seconds, Lockidge froze. Then the activated ones dropped one by one, like puppets with their strings cut. In the yard, the mess hall, the cells, bodies collapsing, eyes rolling back, as if some invisible switch had flipped them all off at once. There was the opening. Before they could move, the lights died, and a voice flooded the system. Unit J13, you've been located. Return to origin, or all survivors will be eliminated. Keller stared at him. They're tracking you. Jay just took the handset, jacked it into the server and said, Come, I'm waiting. The quiet after the fall of the activated didn't last. Emergency lights pulsed a deep red, turning Lockidge into a hell of dancing shadows. Low sirens throbbed, less like alarms, more like an artificial heart about to flatline. The system had reacted. Someone or something had seized central control. In the yard, the conscious inmates ran in circles, trying to make sense of it. Guards blocked gates, but plenty had figured it out. Command wasn't in charge anymore. In the control room, Jay and Keller fought to keep the server up. A message kept flashing. Lazarus protocol reinstated, critical level. Micah stumbled in, blood on his shoulder. They're coming from Psych, but they're not the same. Jay looked up. Meaning? Soldiers. Real ones. Uniforms. Tactical masks. Not inmates. Hunters. Keller peered through the window, eyes wide, as a combat formation advanced down the corridor. Synchronized. No hesitation. They activated the final unit, he murmured. The part of the project still in testing. They never needed all the prisoners. They just needed the stage. Lockidge was a simulator, a training ground dressed up as a penitentiary, and the simulation had just ended. Jay drew a slow breath. Then it's time to get off their board. He turned to the console and punched in a sequence only he knew. A code burned into his mind from before he was locked up. A buried protocol, still valid. Purgatory phase, activate. Screens flipped. Doors began unlocking. Cells popped with hard clacks. The psych wing sealed itself. What did you do? Micah asked. I gave the system a new mission, Jay said. Cancel the experiment, neutralize the controllers. Anderson burst in with a backpack full of improvised charges from the shop. We can seal the sublevel once, but we'll need a distraction topside. I'll handle it, Keller said. Somebody's got to herd the survivors to the outer yard. Micah hesitated. And you, Jay? Jay looked at each of them. I'm finishing what I started. I've got to reach the command core, the mirror room. That's where it began. That's where it ends. On the way, he passed blood-lined halls. Unconscious inmates, some still breathing, disoriented guards. In one cell he found Padre, bound, out cold but alive. The old man had held on. Jay carried him to a safe spot and left him with Anderson. If I don't come back, he said to the ex-soldier, you will. Then he went alone. Red lights blinked like the eyes of a living machine. In a corridor ahead, a masked soldier stood waiting. No attack, just stillness, like he needed an order. Jay raised a hand. The soldier hesitated, as if he recognized the signal. Then the mask twitched. The hand drifted toward the weapon. Jay was faster. A sharp shot to the throat, another to the arm, weapon gone. Seconds later, the soldier hit the floor. Before blacking out, he rasped one sentence. "He's waiting, in the heart of the prison." Exactly what Jay wanted and feared. At the observation suite, the one with the mirror, the chill of concrete climbed his boots. The door slid open. Inside, the other Jay sat with his back to him, watching feeds of everything that had happened. "You took your time," the man said without turning. "I'm not part of this anymore." He stood, wearing the same uniform Jay had worn years ago. Clean, immaculate, but the eyes were empty. "You don't have to fight it. It's in your blood, in your code." "I rewrote mine." They faced each other, two halves of a shattered mirror. Only one would walk out. The finale was here, and this time there was no remote control, only choice. Inside the mirrored room, two identical men faced off. On one side, Jay, dirty, wounded, real. On the other, the clean, cold, programmed reflection, the original prototype, kept safe as a reserve unit. A plan B, the shadow that never disobeyed. "You're the error," said the artificial soldier, tightening his tactical glove, "an emotional glitch that cost us years of research." Jay stepped forward. "And you're what's left when they rip out consciousness." The other smirked faintly, emotionless. "Consciousness is a burden. And you're about to sink with it." The room went into lockdown. Doors sealed. White lights flooded the chamber. A combat circle lit up on the floor, projected by sensors. A private arena built for two men who had once been one. The fight started without warning. Jay struck first, a straight punch to the jaw. The other slipped it effortlessly, countering with a knee to the gut. Jay slammed against the wall, the impact driving the air from his lungs. But he rose. Because this time he knew he wouldn't win with strength. He had to be human. He had to make mistakes. He had to improvise. The prototype was trained to anticipate every pattern, every move. But instinct was outside its program. Jay lunged again, this time feigning a slip. The forced mistake threw off the timing. For a split second, the prototype stumbled, enough for Jay to drive his elbow into the base of its neck. Metal. It wasn't just flesh. There were implants. The fight escalated. Glass walls shattered with every impact. Equipment crashed to the floor. The room filled with the sound of blows and ragged breathing. Every strike dragged old voices into the present. Trainers, commanders, scientists whispering, "You're not a person. You're an asset." But Jay shouted with each hit, "I'm more than that. I'm real." The prototype staggered, a thin trickle of blood running from its nose. Jay froze for a second. "He bleeds." "You feel that?" Jay taunted, sweat and blood running down his face. "That's called pain, and it's what separates me from you." No reply. The prototype lunged in rage, but Jay yanked a live wire from the wrecked console and slammed it into the soldier's chest. The current ripped through the modified body with a crackling hiss. Internal lights flickered. The man dropped to his knees. "System compromised," the prototype stammered, eyes trembling. Jay staggered closer. "You don't have to obey anymore." Silence. The prototype lifted his eyes. For an instant, no hatred, only doubt. "Who am I?" "Someone who never had the chance to choose." Jay pulled a syringe from his pocket. The same neural inhibitor they'd used for remote control. But this time, it was an antidote. Something Micah had formulated from the stolen files. "Take it, or die a tool." The prototype hesitated, then, with trembling hands, drove the needle into his arm. Nothing. For a few seconds, nothing. Then he collapsed. Heavy. Alive, but silent. Jay knelt beside him, stared at the face he'd hated, and now only pitied. Suddenly, a sound. The room shook. Screens flashed a countdown. System purge in 5 minutes. The final protocol. Wipe everything. Burn the evidence. The entire sublevel would be incinerated. Jay stood, hoisted the unconscious prototype onto his shoulders. He was still breathing. He ran, up emergency stairs, through collapsing corridors, explosions ripping behind him, concrete crumbling. Smoke burning his lungs. At the final hall, Keller was waiting. "He alive?" he shouted. "Yes, but he needs time." "The evac started. We've got 60 seconds. Anderson appeared at a side door, the path to the yard wide open. Outside, helicopters swarmed the horizon. Jay sprinted. Behind him, Lockidge was swallowed in flames. He cleared the outer gate and collapsed to his knees. Keller dragged the prototype onto a stretcher. Medics swarmed. Micah staggered in with Padre in his arms, still unconscious but alive, smiling. Jay looked up. For the first time, he breathed open air without fences, and for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what lived inside him. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a number. He was a man. And now, he was free. Lockidge no longer existed. Where the prison once stood, only smoking ruins remained, ringed by white tents, government trucks, and circling helicopters. The fire was contained, but not the truth. In days, the Lockidge incident spread like wildfire. Then the official reports vanished, footage erased, names blacked out. The world moved on, as if nothing had happened. But those who lived it would never forget. Padre was moved to a rehab clinic. He didn't talk much, but smiled every time he saw Jay, like he somehow knew the cycle was broken. Micah, still an inmate, was given access to a private federal library. They called it a reward. He knew it was just another way to silence him. He accepted anyway. Truth sometimes survives better in silence than in noise. Anderson walked free under a protected identity. Vanished. Word was, he lived in the mountains now, alone, with no orders left to follow. Keller went back to the FBI, but different, less patriotic, more human. In his final report, he wrote one line his superior struck out. The greatest mistake wasn't creating the soldier, it was never giving him the right to choose who he wanted to be. As for the other Jay, the prototype, he survived, but never spoke again, lived in a twilight state, suspended between two worlds, the one he was programmed for and the one he never got to live. And the real Jay, he vanished. No one saw him after the evac. Some said he escaped, others that the government silenced him, but the truth was different. He chose to disappear. 1 month later, in a remote cabin deep in the California woods, a calm-eyed man carved a name into a piece of wood. Nathan. The child's name, the memory that survived the programming, the reason for everything, the bond no machine could erase. That man wasn't a soldier anymore, not an experiment. He was someone who chose not to forget. And for that, at last, he was at peace. In the dead of night, a figure walks among tall trees, carrying only a backpack and a memory that refuses to die. He stops at the edge of a lake. The water mirrors the moon and his face. The same face, yet finally different. Behind him, a shadow shifts. For a second he doesn't react. Then he smiles almost imperceptibly. "You can come out. I knew you'd come." The shadow moves closer, but the camera cuts away before the voice can answer. The world will never know what was said, but he already knew how it would end. What if who you are isn't really your choice? If the memories that define you are programmed fragments? And what makes you human is precisely the ability to question everything. If this story held you this far, share it. But not just for the action or the twist. Share it for the question it leaves behind. Are you in control, or do you only think you are?